All right. The lecture on Karl Marx comes from his book, The Communist Manifesto. In it, you only have to read chapter one. So, Karl Marx is a German historian, not a Russian political communist. Okay, he's a German professor of history who spent a lot of his time in England. And um, probably his most useful idea is the idea of dialectical materialism that you see there on the first bullet. Basically, he breaks down for us that history is in reality about political economy. Um, it's not what we've been taught, right? Like we've been taught that history gets moved by ideas. Um, and for Marx, dialectical materialist history is a history of resources and technology and money and power, not about race or gender or religion uh, or philosophy or ethics or art or any other type of worldview. Um, the basically like what Marx is pointing out is that the history of mankind is the history of class conflict, right? In reality, it's about the haves and the have-nots, as he says. This means that like these other ideologies, right, like being a Republican or being a Democrat, being Catholic or being Protestant, being Christian or being gay, being pro Blue Lives Matter, being pro Black Lives Matter. Um, for for Marx, right, those are all things that are perpetuated by art and media and religion and identity politics and political parties for the sake of creating a false consciousness, right? A false consciousness is like this kind of false way of thinking about yourself and where you fit in the world around you. And so for Marx, right, when people are busy, fighting Jewish versus Muslim, right, or being Christian versus gay, or being, um, pro cops instead of pro Black lives, or being Democrat instead of being Republican or whatever. For Karl Marx, that's a false consciousness. You've been kind of trained by people, right? Priests, preachers, politicians, newscasters, writers, artists, right? They've trained your brain to think in terms of us versus them as a way of preventing class consciousness from establishing, right? Class consciousness is the awareness that really all of our problems are primarily caused by the elite, the people in charge, the people with money and power, right? Um, if they don't want 99.9999% of the planet to figure out that they're all really on the same side. They're all really on the side of the have-nots, right? Um, because the day that happens is the day that they realize the ones that own the whole planet are really 0.00001%. That's less than one in several million, um, and they're really like a small portion of the planet, right? So that tiny percentage that's in charge of everything, right? Their job is to find people who work for them to help kind of create these um, false consciousnesses, right? As a way of masking the real sources of anxiety and suffering, right? The reason most of us are filled with anxiety and suffering is because we're in a system that requires taxes and that requires payments of bills and that requires you to like sacrifice all of your free time, all of your youth, all of your energy, and all of your family time, right? Pursuing this productivity model that they expect us to fulfill that keeps them, buying yachts and second homes and enough money for 10 generations down the road, right? And spaceships, right? Because billionaires like to go up into space all of a sudden. So um, the point that Marx is making here is that like your 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 anxiety and your suffering is you're taught to blame other people who are also suffering from anxiety and suffering, right? So you blame the immigrants, and you blame the minorities, and you blame the gays, and you blame women, right? And you blame Muslims or whoever, right? Or you blame white people, or you blame cops. But the reality is that everybody that's blaming each other, right? Those aren't really the real source of why you don't have enough money to, get the medicine for your child's leukemia, right? It's not them. They're not the real reason why you work 60 to 75 hours a week and you still don't have enough money to make ends meet, right? It's or why you can't find a job, right? It's not the other people that are also struggling that are really your problem, right? So again, right, these ideologies, these worldviews of religion and art and politics and gender and so on, right? These are meant to create a false consciousness that distracts you from blaming the real people in charge by blaming the wrong people, right? It creates a bunch of other conflicts. It's what Sun Tzu in The Art of War calls divide your enemy and conquer them. But here, the elites, the rulers, they're dividing the rest of us, and that's why we remain conquered. Now, how do we break this apart, or how do we understand this better, or how do we find proof of what he's talking about? Marx explains that there's in society, every society throughout history, there's what he calls the means of production. The means of production are the knowledge, the technology, and the resources that are all required in order for producing the necessities of life, the things that we need to survive within a historical period. Necessities of life is in quotes because what you need to survive is something that changes from one period to the next. This brings us up to the two rules that Marx has for history, right? First, rule number one, he says, as the necessities of life and the means of production change, the historical period changes, right? Second, those who own and control the means of production are the true rulers of the historical period. So it's not your politicians, your presidents, your prime minister. They're not the real rulers. The real rulers are the people who own and control the means of production, right? Now, here we see a chart that kind of breaks it down. Like the history of humanity started off as unorganized society, right? Hunter gatherers, clans, traveling, following the food. This creates this era of primitive communism, right? He calls it that because tribes primarily shared, right? Yes, the warrior that killed the animal got to eat first, but everybody else got to eat off of that animal. That animal was not privately owned. The whole tribe or the whole clan ate from what the hunters brought back. They all ate from what the farmers grew. They all, shared the fur off the animals to make clothes and lodgings and blankets and so on. So there's this kind of like primitive communism during the hunter-gatherer period that he calls unorganized society, right? These conflicts with each other for resources eventually leads to division of labor, private property, and tribalism, right? The first tribes, um, they begin to kind of fight each other, right? Until somebody starts to put an army big enough together to take over all the other tribes, and this results in empire, right? The first building of empire, um, like the Roman Empire, or like the Macedonian Empire, or the Egyptian Empire, or the empires of Mesopotamia, right? This, as they begin to kind of like spread out with their empire and their armies for more properties as they begin to build cities, puts them into conflict with barbarians, like the Germans against the Romans, right? Um, some of them get caught alive, and this creates a new labor force called slavery, right? Um, the barbarians and the empire fight back and forth for many centuries until eventually um, they tear the empire down, and then eventually this creates the aristocracy or feudalism or what we just finished studying, the medieval period, right? Um, there, the countries begin to fight in war against each other, Spain versus France versus England, until eventually their need for weapons and ships creates a new class called the bourgeoisie, which are the middle class. Now, here, middle class, we'll get into in a few seconds, but it doesn't mean like the middle class that we know of today, right? But this new class, the bourgeoisie, eventually demands more rights and more property, and they begin not only the era of democracy but the era of capitalism, which is what we live in today. So notice this graph kind of like summarizes very quickly, right? This process, dialectical process, like it's a cycle, but when it comes back to the beginning, it's on a new level, right? Kind of like a spiral, and that's what history looks like for Marx, right? We keep kind of coming back to these same things, conflict, which leads to a resolution, which leads to new conflict, to new resolution. Um, and that's why he calls it the dialectical. It's materialistic in the sense that, right, history is not being moved by ideas or art forms or religion or philosophy. It's being moved by material conditions. What are the technologies available? What are the resources? Who owns them or who controls them, right? Those are the things that really affect history. And so, this is his theory of dialectical materialism. Now, when we get to the present, what period are we in? Well, we're in the period called capitalism, right? Um, Capitalism is a historical period when capital, money, is the new and only means of production. It doesn't matter if you invent, right, a new technology for energy that's clean, pollution free, and renewable. Without the money to build it, it'll just be a dream, right? Doesn't matter if you have a ranch with oil underneath it. Without the money, you can't drill for it and make yourself richer, right? And so, money is required as the means of production that creates all the other necessities of life, right? Without money, you can't have phones, Wi-Fi, laptops, food, water, etc., right? So capitalism is the current historical period. Now, in this historical period, there are two players, all right? The first are the bourgeoisie. Now, when he writes in 1844, bourgeoisie still means middle class, okay? But even back then, middle class did not mean what it means today. Today, when we talk about the middle class, the upper class are the rich, the middle class are the ones that like have homes and they work and they have cars, right? And they're not poor, right? But they're not rich. They're right in the middle. And then the lower class are the poor, right? That's what middle class means today. That is not what middle class meant at the beginning. Bourgeoisie or middle class, right? They're the ones who are not peasants, right? But they're not kings and queens either. They're what the French called nouveau riche. In other words, they're the people who their work is what produced their money for them, right? But eventually, that money becomes their new source of money, right? In other words, today, the bourgeoisie would not be the middle class. Today, the bourgeoisie would be the people whose money makes money. These are the ones that no longer have to work. They no longer have to trade their labor from their body for wages because they have so much money that money makes money on its own, right? On the notes that are on canvas, right? I put two lists there, right? One is a list of the billionaires that are in the billionaire class, right? They're the ones who are rich enough so that their money is the one making money. And second, I put a list of the corporations, the richest corporations in the world. The corporations and the billionaire class are the bourgeoisie of today, the bourgeoisie of 2023. So when I talk about bourgeoisie, I'm talking about billionaires and I'm talking about corporations. I'm not talking about your uncle who has 2.5 million, right? And is like a dentist or whatever, right? Like they're not the bourgeoisie as much as they'd like to think they are. They're not, right? They still have to go to work to continue getting that money coming in and continue paying off that mansion or whatever, right? Even George Clooney. George Clooney, Bill, you know, what's his name? His buddy, Brad Pitt, right? Like, even they are not bourgeoisie because the day they stop acting, they stop having cash rolling in, right? Um, so make sure we're clear who the bourgeoisie are, right? The second player in the capitalist historical period are the proletariat. The proletariat are the working class who trade in labor from their physical body in exchange for wages as a means of subsistence, which means the means of bare survival. The proletariats, are the vast majority of the planet's population. I'm not exaggerating when I say that they are 99.99999% of the planet. So, what do we know about capitalism based off of Karl Marx? Well, he launches a number of criticisms about capitalism, right? Um, First criticism, bourgeoisie, all right? Uh, he basically says that the bourgeoisie are leeches on society, all right? And what he means is the proletariat makes everything but owns nothing, while the bourgeoisie makes nothing but owns everything, right? And so the question for Marx is then why do we have them, right? I mean, if they're literally owning everything and squeezing us and making us live under these conditions, then why do we have them, right? Why do we continue to support them? I mean, after all, we're supporting them and they're taking up all of the resources. They take up all of the energy, right? They take up all of the land, right? They take up all of the corporations. And, for Marx, he doesn't want to hear you tell them about how they're the ones who created everything with the money. All right. Um, the fact is that the people are the ones really creating everything, right? Walmart is Walmart because of the people who are making the products, the people who are shipping the products, the people who are stocking the products, and the people who are charging you for the products, right? That's how the product ends up on your table, right? It's because of the people, not because of the CEO, not because of the Walton family, and so on, right? So in the end, for Marx, right, the bourgeoisie are just leeches on society. Criticism number two: the proletariat is stuck in a rat race or in a rat's maze, right? He gives us a quote: "These laborers who must sell themselves piecemeal, right? We sell our muscles here, our brain there, our mouth over here, right? We sell different skills, right? These laborers are a commodity. We're a product on the market, right? We sell ourselves on the market, and we receive as soon as we receive our wages, right? We are set upon by landlords, grocers, and debtors, right? As soon as we get the paycheck, it's cannibalized by all these people who come in to take their portion of it, and we're left with nothing." Yeah, I put a couple of things here for you to look at, right? Notice the rat race, just like the mouse that's running on the little wheel and he's busting his little legs and he never gets anywhere. That's us, right? We're stuck in traffic on our way to work. We're stuck in a cubicle all day pushing papers, and then we're stuck in traffic on our way home. Then we sleep, we wake up, and we get started again, right? We're stuck in this wheel, getting nowhere. Um, Notice it's also kind of a maze. Um, it's also kind of a maze, right? Society, makes us go in one direction, working harder, right? Supposedly to earn more money, supposedly to buy more things, and then just keep going in pursuit of this thing called happiness, right? Um, but this thing we call happiness is really kind of just exhausting and stressful, and it's designed to make other people like rich and at our expense, right? And so, notice in the final one, we work, we go into debt, right? We work, we get paid, we pay our bills, we try to eat, but there's not enough in our savings, and there's not enough to pay for food and doctor visits, etc., and cars and gasoline. So we go into debt. This forces us to work, and so we're kind of stuck in this cycle over and over again, right? Um, that's the second criticism. Third criticism, Marx points out that capitalism always leads to income inequality and wealth inequality and property inequality, right? The only way for somebody to make profit is to keep growing their product, to keep growing their profit. That means competing against others, driving other people into unemployment, right? Capitalism is competitive by its very nature. You have to get the job. That means 18 other people did not get the job. You have to get the promotion. That means 20 other people did not get the promotion, right? And so by the time we're done with it and we're in 2023, uh, currently 8 men, and yes, they're men, not people, right? 8 men own the same as 3.6 billion other people. 8. Um, and so this shows you, right? Like, I mean, think about it. 3.6 billion people own. They would have to all add up their stuff together to own the same as 8 dudes, right? That shows you how unequal property really is. The next criticism that Marx brings up against capitalism is that government ends up corrupt. Basically, what Marx points out is that even though capitalism and and democracy came up at the beginning of the modern period in the Renaissance at the same time as a reaction to monarchy and feudalism, right? The fact is that capitalism is in the end going to destroy democracy. Um, so that government in the end gets bought by the rich, and they become a committee of puppets appointed by the rich to manage their interests, to take care of the bourgeoisie, right? And I think you see that right now, right? A lot of you are disillusioned with government and democracy and the vote because you see all of the corruption taking place in DC. Um, and Marx would just look at us and say, I told you so. Um, the next kind of criticism of capitalism is a breakdown in social relationships. There's 2 of these. So this is the first one. Marx points out that capitalism and fierce competition for profit, wages, promotion has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. Loyalty, brotherhood, um, patriotism, faith, right? These things that used to bind people together no longer really exist for Marx under capitalism, right? The only thing that exists as a relationship between individuals is competition and exploitation and self-interest, right? Self-interest is it. We're all out taking care of ourselves. We're all out there trying to be number one, right? So that's not the way it used to be, right? There used to be other relationships besides just self-interest in history. Second breakdown of social relationships, alienation, right? Um, Alienation is basically estrangement, right? A creation of distance between individuals that happens for Marx as a result of capitalism. Basically, we become alienated from our own product, right? We no longer own or control the product. I mean, this is what we're seeing right now with the actors and the writers in Hollywood, right? They're striking because even though they're the ones who draw it, or they're the ones who create the script, or they're the ones who act in it, right? The companies are the ones who own that product. They remove it from them so that the writers and the creators no longer have a right to determine, what it's worth or what it should be sold at, or whether there should be sequels, or what happens with the product, right? Like it's stripped away from us as soon as we make it, right? Somebody else owns it, the company, and they come and they take it from us, right? We're alienated from our colleagues and coworkers. We're all in competition for the same promotions, for the same commissions, right? We're all in competition with each other for the same salaries and for jobs, and so this pits us against each other. No one really trusts each other at work. We're alienated from our family. We tell each other that we work harder for the family, but the reality is we never spend time with the family because we're always working, right? We're alienated from our neighbors and citizens. Everybody's paranoid about theft, about child molestation, about murder, right? We put fences and security systems to keep our stuff inside our house, right? We're alienated from the city itself, right? Those that can afford it move out to the suburbs. They commute to work. They exist inside of a cubicle at work. They exist inside a cubicle in their car. They exist inside a cubicle in their apartment, right? And they're never really kind of like in the city itself, right? People don't know each other. There's a reason why serial killers was possible at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, because people are living in cities and no one knows anybody, right? There's eyewitnesses, even if most of them don't care because of the self-interest, and then those that do don't even know who you are because there's like 7.3 million people living in Houston or whatever. So these things kind of create this unknowing, right? We can't know each other. We don't know. We're total strangers to each other, right? When they finally catch the serial killer, and the news gets a wind of it, they interview the neighbors, and the neighbors are surprised, right? Like we don't even know each other to the extent that we wind up being neighbors with serial killers, and then we get surprised when the FBI shows up, because that's how little we know about each other. We're alienated from the world itself, right? Um, some of you are so disgusted with the world that you live in that you'd rather spend all of your time gaming. You'd rather spend all of your time on social media. You'd rather spend all of your time watching TikTok videos, right? You'd rather spend, the next 2 to 4 weeks, um, you know, becoming a sniper in Call of Duty, or exploring planets in No Man's Sky, because you're kind of broken from the world, the real world, right? You'd rather spend your time in a virtual world. And finally, we become alienated from ourselves, right? We don't know who we are. We become what we need to be in order to prostitute ourselves for a salary, for wages. Some of us um, would, we become other people on the internet, right? Um, because that's how, you know, bored we are with ourselves. Um, we, we become something that we can try to sell online, right? OnlyFans, right? Or webcamming, or the next YouTube influencer, right? There's different ways in which we kind of even begin to prostitute not only who we are, but who we're not, right? We become these other personalities online in the hopes of trying to like make money off of it. And so notice it's a lot, right? There's a lot going on with capitalism according to Marx. So what's next? Well, according to Marx, eventually we get tired of it. And eventually the greed of the bourgeois and their exploitation of the proletariat reaches the extreme where the working class will no longer have any choice but to revolt, right? Basically, will be working hours and still be starving, still have no AC, still have no electricity, still have no clean drinking water. Our children will be sick and dying despite how many hours we work, and we get tired of it, right? Um, and so we rise up, according to Karl Marx. Now, what he points out is that violence against law enforcement and the military is pointless, right? Some of you, um, you know, you're Marxist online and you hate the cops and you hate the military, and Marx tells us that that kind of hatred is useless because they are proletariats too, right? The military are proletariats. Law enforcement cops are proletariats. They might be class traders, that's what Marx would call them, but they are still proletariats. And as a result, the bourgeois doesn't care about them. So no matter how many cops you kill or how many soldiers you kill, the bourgeoisie are not going to care about that because they're proletariats. They're replaceable, just like you and I are replaceable. So notice that rioting and civil war and revolution, and in terms of fighting and violence, where you're killing cops and the soldiers, that's not going to get you any closer to changing things, according to Marx. So what works then? He points out that the only thing that harms the bourgeois is their profit. And so the communist revolution must be a global general strike. In other words, no one goes to work. No more farmers. No more factory workers. No more bus riders. No more semi-truck drivers. No more grocery store stock people. No more cashiers. No more nurses. Excuse me. Um, Basically, all production stops. No more food for anybody. No more electricity for anybody. And once you stop long enough, like you stop everybody from going to work, that will make the company's stock worthless. The bourgeoisie will be penniless. And this will lead to a collapse of capitalism. Now, you have to remember, this is going to be beyond messy, right? I mean, you're going to have looters because people have to feed their families, right? And they're going to be breaking into the stores, and people are going to be armed, and people are going to shoot each other, and people are going to be hiding with water and batteries and toilet paper, kind of like in COVID. Um, so yes, it's still a mess, right? Every revolution is a mess. But the key is eventually it causes a systemic shutdown. The entire society collapses, and then we have to rebuild. So, what do we rebuild to, right? For um, for Marx, what comes next is communism, right? How do we define communism? He tells us from each, right? From each you take what they can give, and to each you give what they need, right? People will work at what they're good at, and people will be given what they need, right? So what does this look like? Free school for everyone, free health care for everyone, housing for everyone, employment for everyone, food for everyone, electricity for everyone, clean water for everyone, right? Sounds fantastic. But, right, there's always a but. What's the price? Well, the price is your freedom, right? The state is responsible for directing all the resources, and they assign the roles based off of the needs of the state and the skills that are had. So basically, the trade-off is you have all of those things we just mentioned for free, but you have to work for it, and you have to work at the job that the state needs you to go work at. You don't decide to be an artist, or you don't decide to run for president just because you don't really feel like doing a real labor job. You don't get to be CEO. Those types of jobs are obsolete. They're removed. You have to go work at something that the state actually needs. Ditch digging, right? Plumbing, welding, electrical engineer, um, construction worker, right? Those are the things that we need. No one needs a CEO, right? And so, um, you know, the state will be in charge of telling people what their job's going to be, where they're going to live, how many kids can they have, because again, we have to make sure that the resources are there for everybody, right? Now, this is only true. This idea of the state is in charge and controlling everything is only true until people evolve on their own to where they start to do it themselves, right? Once people evolve, right, after enough generations live in this kind of a world, until they evolve where they no longer care about me and what I want and self-interest, and they start caring about like, hey, what does my country need from me? What do my people need from me? Until we change the way we think, then at the final utopia, right, that's there at the end of history for Karl Marx is basically an anarchist communism, right? Basically, no government. Everybody kind of already knows what they need to do. You raise your children to know what they need to do. Everybody does what they're good at, that the state also needs them to do, and everybody exchange with everybody freely. You're hungry, you come and you grab your food. You just got married and you have your kids, you go look for one of the empty places. If not, we construct one for you, and then you move in, right? And so on. As long as you continue, and everybody continues working because they work at what they're good at and what they enjoy doing for the good of all. Now, if you think you've never seen this before, you have. Well, at least some of you have. It's called Star Trek, right? Like if you watch Star Trek, Star Trek is a utopian communism, right? The government doesn't actually have to force anybody to do everything. People are already trained to want to do what they're good at for the benefit of all. Nobody ever pays for things in Star Trek. You just punch in this microwave looking thing, and then it makes air into food or uniforms or school supplies, right? Um, so notice that's kind of Star Trek in a way is kind of what Karl Marx is looking for in the future. All right. There's a lot more to Karl Marx, but this is kind of what we've got for today. So if you find this interesting, you want to read more on them, there's plenty of Marx out there to read. A lot of it's free too online because they're Marxists, so they want to give it to you for free. So definitely take a look on that. I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.